called The Negro Family, A Case for National Action. I was in college in 1970, and we read the book when I was a freshman. And most of the white kids, I went to an Ivy League school, only about 10% of the school was black. Most of the white kids called the man that wrote the book racist, patriarchal, and condemned him. And I'm sitting in the back, I raised my hand, I said, you know, I grew up in the inner city, and I'm beginning to see more and more single-parent households and seeing a lot of guys acting out, and I think maybe he's gone to something. So I got called an Uncle Tom by the white kids, and the bootlicking, shuffling bootlicking by the white kids, and Uncle Tom by the handful of black kids that were in the class. Same thing's happening right now. Fact is, in 1965, 25% of black kids were born outside of wedlock. The number now is 73%. And I didn't say this, Obama did. A kid raised out of dad is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crimes, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 20 times more likely to end up in jail. Tupac Shakur, speaking of him, he said, I know for a fact, had I had a father, I would have been more disciplined, I would have had more confidence. I once interviewed a guy named Kwesi Mfume. He used to be the head of the NAACP. One of the few so-called black leaders I can get on my show. I've called Jesse 50 times, Al Sharpton 50 times, Maxine Waters 100 times, they won't come on. But Kwesi Mfume did come on. And I said, Mr. Mfume, as between the presence of white racism or the absence of black fathers, which poses the bigger threat to the black community? Without missing a beat, he said, the absence of black fathers.
So there's always this stat that I always see about what happens to kids that grow up in homes without a father. Like a certain amount, a certain percentage go to jail, is more likely to go to jail. A certain percentage is more likely to have kids out of wedlock and at an early age. But if you look at the stat, like when you hear people presenting the stats, when you hear people talking about it, whether it's in a speech or interview, and I've been hearing that thing for I don't know how long. But it wasn't until recently that I actually looked it up, because I was wondering, okay, well, what year are these stats from? Is this like every year? How often do they compile that data? There's always one stat missing, one that's at the top. Whenever I find it online, like either infographic or there's a website, fatherhood.com, there's always a stat that's high on the list that nobody else seems to mention. This is just from maybe I just haven't, I haven't listened to every time someone have mentioned that stat, but one that I haven't heard mentioned was, and I think on the list that I found, the few lists, it was either number 2, it was in the top 5, and that was a high percentage of kids that grow up in a home without a father. They have, I can't remember if it says behavioral problems or mental problems, mental illness, mental issues. Even if it just said behavioral problems. It didn't even come to my attention until I looked it up. Again, I wasn't like seeking this out, but I was just trying to figure out where these stats come from. And when I saw that number 2 or number in the top 5, I was like, wait a minute. And then I went back and listened to the few videos I was listening to, and I'm like, why do they skip over that? Why do they skip over behavioral problems? And that's what tuned me in to that aspect of it. I was just wondering why no one talks about that. And at first I was thinking, well, maybe you can't quantify it, but it was in the stats. All the other stats were matching up with what I was hearing in these speeches and these interviews. So why would that be left out? Why would the one about mental health or behavioral problems be left out? And it's kind of dawned on me that, well, that's because nobody wants to really talk about that. They want to talk about like what I want to say, like the drama aspect of it, but they don't want to talk about that mental health thing. We don't want to go there. We can all sort of have an idea of what a crime is, of what going to jail is. We can quantify that. We can quantify that's like black and white. someone going to jail, someone committing a crime, someone having a kid, someone being poor, because that's one of the stats. We can solidify, or we can put a period on infant death syndrome. That's one of the, or sudden infant mortality, whatever that stat is. We can put a we can like, that's black and white. That behavioral thing, we don't know how to, that's kind of like, how do you talk about that? Like, does that cause a problem? Like, is there some mental thing? I don't know. I want to pose this question because I grew up without a father. So say no father, awesome mom, awesome uncle, awesome siblings. Are these stats in the absence of that? That's what I don't get. Like, is it in the absence of all of these other things? You can't, I don't think it's fair to just say, or to just make this sweeping generalization, and the stats are whatever they are. I'm just saying, in the absence of what other foundations were there? Because I'm gonna tell you like this: I grew up without a dad, and everybody around me did. Some of them had a dad around. I didn't even have a dad around. I didn't even know what that was, and it didn't even bother me until I became an adult. Until I started seeing, like, actually, when I became a father, like when I became a dad, that's when it was like, when you trying to figure out, and when you trying to think of what is your role model, who is your dad role model, right? Because if you got a bunch of people growing up in an environment of, like, not the best environment, and then some of them go straight, some of them go left, some of us go right, some of us end up in jail, some of us end up a statistic, and some of us don't. And none of us have had fathers growing, like, everything else is equal except for the other parts in the family, the mom, the siblings, the family base, the uncles, whatever, right? And I'm going to tell you like this: I didn't have any of that support. Like, I had my mom, my grandma, my brother, cousins, but there was no, I pretty much learned from my peers. There was no male adult. Matter of fact, in my family, I learned more from crackheads and junkies on the street than I did from any male figure in my family. That's just straight up. That's just straight up the truth. Like, no uncle ever try to teach me anything. I was in denial for a long time, thinking like, man, that shit don't affect me. Who gives a shit about a dad? Like, if he didn't want to be there, if he wanted to be there, he would have been there. I'm not gonna lose sleep. I'm not gonna shed a tear. That was the type of mentality I had, and a lot of people around me. But as I grew older and felt, no matter who I was around, no matter who I was with, people that loved me, my family, my wife, her family, I couldn't understand why I still felt like something wasn't there. That's when I started realizing, oh, dude, maybe it's because, especially like when I met my father-in-law, and when I met my father-in-law, he would drop jewels. I'm like, it was like I was getting nourished with this new perspective, these new words of wisdom from an unsuspecting source. And also, when I would see my father-in-law with his dad, that's when I was like, man, that's something I would never have. Like, it's almost like, it's common, but it's all relative to each individual. That's it. Like, share, subscribe. Tell us at straighttalkuncut.com where you can send questions, comments. And like I always say, I don't know a lot, but I do know. I talk straight about. This has been Straight Talk Uncut. Thank you guys for listening. Talk to you in the next episode.